And before this video begins, I'd like to give a special shout out to my Asbantium level patron, Fallon Cortez. Everything has to end, which is a sentiment Doctor Who fans know more than anyone else. Indeed, every few years, fans have to say farewell to their beloved main character, who regenerates into a completely different person. And despite being fresh off the heels of a big, epic 50th anniversary special, 2013 was no different. On Christmas Day, the tradition would continue, in the form of the Time of the Doctor, where the 11th Doctor faces his ultimate test and has to fight almost the entire universe to protect one small village. Time of the Doctor is a very ambitious episode ending an entire era. Not only does it send off the immensely popular 11th Doctor, but it also wraps up the sprawling Silence Will Fall story arc that had begun all the way at the beginning of the era. But does it achieve these goals in a satisfying way? Is it a regeneration story for the ages? Or is it a bit too self-indulgent for its own good? Well, here we stand at the precipice of a new golden era, and it's time to say goodbye to the 11th Doctor.
But times change, and so must I.
The episode starts off really strong and mysteriously, with everyone in the universe converging on a strange planet sending off a cryptic signal. Even the signal itself is unsettling to hear, it just sounds so eerie and mysterious. This was intentional, because we later find out that the reason every race came to the planet is because the signal filled them with an intense feeling of dread. I do love how we're given the true scale of just how many different species have descended upon this unassuming planet. Not only do we see the visuals of all the ships in orbit, but we also get a fun sequence of the Doctor hopping from ship to ship, only to get in trouble every single time.
Don't put me on a Dalek ship when I'm holding a broken bit of Dalek! Ow!
A scene like this is amazing, not only because of the upfront humour, but because it also serves as a smooth and subtle way to show the scale of the event, giving you visual evidence of these titanic alien races somehow putting aside their differences to investigate this planet. That's how big this mystery is. There's even the Church of the Papal Mainframe, who had appeared in series 5 and 6 and are now a nudist colony or something. I swear to God, Moffat, am I going to have to go and cut that wandering hand off? However, head of the Papal Mainframe Tasha Lem confirms that this planet is actually Trenzalore, which is a huge bombshell hitting incredibly hard. Name of the Doctor introduced us to Trenzalore as this completely obliterated and dead planet ravaged by endless war, and serving as the final resting place of the Doctor and the countless people who died alongside him. So now to find out this Earth-like blue planet is Trenzalore immediately turns the tone of the episode on its head and makes everything very real, because we straight away know how it connects to Name of the Doctor. The previous two episodes had emphasised just how grave the mere mention of Trenzalore is, so even this simple name drop has a huge effect on the audience, because it drives home that this is the Doctor's final adventure. I adore that we get this opportunity to see Trenzalore in its original state. We only got to see the aftermath, so we felt quite detached from everything that had clearly happened to it. However, showing us this quaint and beautiful wintry village immediately puts things into perspective for us. It almost puts a face to the innocents who were buried in that massive graveyard. I think Trenzalore looks gorgeous in this episode. It looks like something straight out of a Christmas card or a postcard, inspired by picturesque German villages. There's so much life there, already making you care so much about the safety of the people who live there. The visuals of the setting alone help to sell the dissonance between the living Trenzalore and the wasteland. Even from the beginning, we can see how the planet is almost being corrupted by the war to come, since when Clara and the Doctor arrive on the planet, they are quickly attacked by weeping angels buried in the snow. This is such a tense scene, making the angels incredibly intimidating after their somewhat mediocre appearances since Blink. This instead uses them like cameos, which is how I believe they should be used because they're so simple and their abilities are easy to communicate, which this scene does well. The monsters snuck onto the planet before the Papal Mainframe shut it all down, and I think this is the best way to incorporate them, since the Weeping Angels don't exactly like sitting around and chilling with other races. Even the idea of them having spaceships feels weird, so I prefer the thought of them just being mysteriously submerged in the snow here, trying to get into the village like these cosmic horror entities. But why are so many alien races and monstrous villains so interested in a random, quaint town called Christmas? Well, the answer comes from the very beginning of Moffat's tenure as showrunner. Right from the start, the writer had the idea of his new Doctor's first adventure tying into his very last, giving the character a threat and a challenge from his own future. He obviously didn't have all the specifics nailed down just yet, but he always intended there to be this kind of complex storyline running throughout the entire 11th Doctor era. Indeed, this huge, significant narrative was introduced in the 11th hour, with the introduction of cracks in time and space, along with the enigmatic warning, "Silence will fall." Things ramped up even further in the finale, with the intentional destruction of the TARDIS at the hands of a mysterious unseen force, which was then revealed as Madame Kavarian and her group of monstrous Silence. The Series 6 story arc focused on how this mysterious group was trying to turn Melody Pond into a weapon to assassinate the Doctor to avert a future war. We were being drip-fed all this scattered information over the course of 2 series, but it still remained extremely cryptic, and the connection between all the events was still up in the air. However, Wedding of River Song had introduced a new prophecy about Trenzalore and the question, Doctor Who? Time of the Doctor finally provides an answer to all of this intrigue, since the signal is emanating from one of those ominous cracks in time, and it's localized entirely in the village's clock tower. Somehow this crack connects to Gallifrey, which was sealed into a pocket universe at the end of Day of the Doctor. I don't really know how this all works, but it's nice to see some connection to the largely standalone middle entry in the Of the Doctor trilogy. The Time Lords are broadcasting a truth field and demanding the Doctor speak his name so that they can return to the universe once again. Naturally, every species wants to prevent this because the Time Lords haven't exactly made many friends over the years. I like how the Doctor is placed in this impossible position. He can either speak his name and free his people at the cost of Trenzalore, or stay and protect Trenzalore by refusing to speak his name. It's such a difficult decision for the character to make after all he has been through to save the Time Lords already. And this dilemma is what finally explains the story arcs of Series 5 and 6. Since the Church of the Papal Mainframe converts to the Church of the Silence, now dedicated to keeping the peace and preventing Trenzalore's destruction as long as the Doctor stays silent. It's a good explanation and it makes a lot of sense in a very Moffat-y way, but the extra wrinkle comes with the reveal that Kavarian was actually in charge of a breakaway chapter who had casually travelled back in time to try to kill the Doctor long before he could reach Trenzalore. This finally ties everything together and explains the whole "silence will fall" thing from before. It's a satisfying and long overdue clarification as to what exactly that stuff was all about, but it only really comes up in a kind of throwaway line by Tasha Lem. It just feels like an afterthought being wrapped up through exposition. Since the return of Gallifrey and the Time Lords would also strike up another war, every species surrounding Trenzalore becomes determined to stop it, which drives home the horrors of the Time War. The mere thought of the Time Lords returning is enough to make all these aliens want to destroy the entire planet and kill the Doctor. Although that last part is pretty par for the course anyway. But the Doctor refuses to give up on the town, so he stays behind because he's always been this symbol of hope. He never abandons those in need. He's all about that hustle, loyalty and respect. Wait, no, wrong character. I think it's so in line with the Doctor's morals to do this. Even though he isn't really one to stick around for very long, he knows that he's all that stands between the people of Christmas and complete annihilation. Over the course of thousands of years, he stands like a sheriff for Christmas, defeating every threat that comes its way. I think it's very appropriate that the people of the town start to almost worship and revere him because he's this mythical figure, almost like a guardian angel. Tales are passed down from father to son to grandson and so on, because the Doctor's longer lifespan means he seems invincible and godlike. It's not straight up hero worship in the annoying way modern Who has often fallen into, but it instead feels very realistic and believable, because he's this constant presence and always spends time with the community, celebrating with them and becoming the foundation of this town as it enjoys its safety. It's a nice touch that all the children even make these drawings of his many adventures through time and space, although it's kind of awkward that they're pretty much only the ones he had with Amy and Rory. If I was Clara, I'd feel a little bit jealous and underappreciated, since those adventures apparently don't matter enough. I love the montage of the war. All these epic encounters as villains try inventive new ways of getting onto the planet below, like invisible tanks and wooden Cybermen, which is a truly fantastic visual, even if it kind of defeats the point of the monster. Some people think that this montage is too short and quick, but I think that's exactly how it needs to be. It shows the sheer scale of this long, protracted conflict, providing us with a clear view of how much time is passing, and just how many threats the Doctor needs to put down. The episode isn't about some big epic war, it's instead about the Doctor himself and how he's dealing with this situation on a personal level. A montage is all it needs, especially with the amount of monsters there are to showcase, because it's pretty much every monster ever. I think the sequence is still suitably epic though, this gauntlet of danger to overcome, pretty much summing the Doctor up as a character. And obviously there are even more battles we never even get to see, like the big snake one. But ultimately it comes down to just the Doctor and the Daleks, because it always does, doesn't it? I suppose it's fitting, especially because of their relationship with the Time Lords in general. It makes a lot of sense that they would do anything to try and prevent their mortal enemies from returning and reigniting the Time War, which wiped out so many Daleks, and the survivors had to claw their way back. So they understandably feel very threatened. And I like how the Doctor ultimately has to team up with the Silence, despite them being such vicious rivals in Series 6. It really represents the massive scale of the war, and how all these unlikely alliances have to be formed to survive. Although I find it pretty stupid that the Daleks puppet Tasha Lem and the Church of the Silence. It's been like 2,000 years, how did the Doctor not notice Tasha hadn't, died of old age? I guess those Time Lord brains really start to wither quickly at the end. Yes, one of the biggest aspects of Time with the Doctor is the prospect of the main character running out of regenerations and dying for good. The classic Who story, The Deadly Assassin, had established a 13-body time limit for Time Lords, allowing them a maximum of 12 regenerations before they run out and kick the bucket properly this time. And since the Doctor was in his 11th incarnation, he was already getting dangerously close to this limit. But then you factor in the Meta Crisis Doctor in Series 4 and the recent introduction of the secretive War Doctor, which ultimately placed the 11th Doctor at the end of this regeneration cycle. Therefore, Moffat knew this episode would have to address the fan favourite question of what happens when the Doctor runs out of regenerations? After all, the last time we had a situation like this, the Master turned into a delicious piece of fried chicken. So something had to be done about this limit and what it meant for the seemingly invincible main character. I like how we see the Doctor slowly getting older and older, which is really sad to see because it shows just how much time he's dedicated to protecting Trenzalore. He's giving multiple lifetimes to keep them safe. The Doctor has been around for a while when the most youthful and babyface incarnation naturally ages into an old man like this. It's hard to imagine the effect this new life has had on the Doctor's mental state. Everyone around him dies, even the children like Barnaby, because they simply grow old and die, while the Doctor keeps going because, he's a Time Lord. It reminds you of why he can never settle down and live a normal life with a human, because he'll outlive everyone. Even the Doctor's Cyberman ally Handles dies, which I personally think is an overrated scene. It's undeniably a sad moment, but not a heartbreaking or crushing scene like a lot of people claim. Also, by the way, Handles isn't a companion, he shouldn't be treated like one. He's simply a narrative tool, a literal talking head of exposition and convenient information to serve a specific purpose. There is no character there to mourn. The music is good and Smith's acting makes the scene powerful, but it's not a huge tragedy. Despite all his friends and allies dying and leaving him all alone on the battlefield, the Doctor has to keep going to protect the town, because that's what the Doctor does. That's who he is as both a person and this near mythical figure for the town. He saves people because he knows it's the right thing to do. He refuses to prioritize his own thoughts and feelings because he always cares more about the people in need. I know when the TARDIS returns he acts as if that's the only reason he stayed, but we all know that's not the case, because the Doctor will always go above and beyond to protect others. It's a really striking visual to see him so old now, withering away as an elderly man because he's been there for so long in this endless, brutal war. He knows it's futile because eventually he'll die and Trenzalore will be destroyed anyway, but he's giving them hope and safety for as long as he can, so generations can still come and go in peace. It's incredibly selfless, and his actions show his age and kindness just as much as his physical appearance. His age is shown most effectively in the really touching and emotional scene of Clara helping her longtime friend pull a Christmas cracker because he's too old and weak to do it himself. It does a great job at showing how deep and unconditional their friendship is. Yes, let's talk about Clara, who has a bit of a bumpy presence in this story. She's the human heart of it all, but that doesn't show until late on. For the most part, she simply fills the companion role of asking questions. At the start, she's desperately trying to cook Christmas dinner because this is a Christmas special, remember? It is a very fun exchange as she begs the Doctor to act as her boyfriend for the day. It's really witty and entertaining.
It's a roller coaster, this phone call.
But I need a boyfriend really quickly.
Well, I hope you're nicer to the next one.
It's a nice sequence showing off their comedic chops and Moffat's quick-witted sense of humour. Clara's family are a bit bland though. You have her recast father and his new wife, I guess? I have no idea who she is. But we do get her sweet old Nan, who is a fun part of the episode, serving as both comic relief and also lending a very wholesome aspect to the story as she comforts Clara. So she's a good part of Clara's awkwardly integrated home life. And speaking of, it's also funny in a relatably cringe comedy way when the Doctor walks into Clara's flat and her family see him completely naked because his clothes are a hologram or something.
Sorry. He's Swedish.
Yeah, you can tell because of his meatballs. Despite Clara coming to Trenzalore with the Doctor, he quickly realises she can't stay because the war would be so brutal and unforgiving, there's no way she'd be able to survive. Even if she did, she'd die of old age like all the others, so he has to send her away for her own good. It reminds me a lot of Rose in Parting of the Ways. The Doctor facing a situation so hopeless he knows he can't survive and has to protect his companion rather than allow them to face the same inevitable death. It really speaks to the severity of the situation. But just like the Doctor not giving up on the town called Christmas, Clara refuses to give up on the Doctor, and almost dies trying to return to him, since she ends up holding onto the outside of the TARDIS and exposing herself to the time vortex, just like Captain Jack did back in Utopia. In an interesting moment, it actually turns out that the TARDIS protected the companion. Now, that might not sound like anything special, but it's important to remember the relationship Clara had with the time and space machine. Throughout Series 7B, they never really got along. It was like the TARDIS rejected Clara's nature as the impossible girl, or it was simply jealous. But either way, this established relationship makes it all the more meaningful that the TARDIS now goes out of its way to protect Clara and help her reach the Doctor again. It's then that Clara's nature as the human soul of the episode comes to fruition. Since everything seems hopeless and the war appears to be lost, the Doctor even admitting he has no fight left because he's run out of time. But Clara refuses to give up, making a desperate appeal to the Time Lords to save him rather than trying to use him to return to the universe. It's incredibly powerful that they do help him, sacrificing their only chance of escaping their lonely pocket universe. The Time Lords have always been presented as spiteful and villainous in the modern era due to the Time War, so having them willingly save the Doctor says a lot about their genuine respect for him, even if it is reluctant. Clara's speech helps them understand the Doctor's importance and value to the universe as a whole. It is a desperate gamble by the companion, showing just how hopeless everything seems, but this refusal to give up is what makes the difference. Without her speech, the Doctor would have died in the war, and the whole planet would have been destroyed, just like we saw in the original timeline during Name of the Doctor, where events had happened much differently. However, thanks to Clara, the Time Lords give the Doctor a whole new regeneration cycle, allowing him to immediately defeat the Daleks and save Trenzalore this time. He thought the future was inescapable, something he had no way of changing, but like the 10th Doctor said at the end of Day of the Doctor, never say there's nothing they can do about it. I do think it's a bit of a shame that the later Timeless Child plot arc kind of ruins the climactic and powerful moment of the Doctor getting more regenerations, because now it turns out the character can just regenerate endlessly or something, so the whole last incarnation thing goes completely out of the window. As the dust settles on Trenzalore, it's then time for the part every fan dreads, the regeneration. Yes, the Doctor's body has worn thin and he has to face his death. This scene is a lot more optimistic and forward-facing than the 10th Doctor's, which had also been the end of the Russell T Davies era, so it bid farewell to every companion from that era. Time of the Doctor was actually going to do something very similar, with Moffat originally hoping to include cameos from pretty much all significant characters from the 11th Doctor's life. There would have been Amy, Rory, River and Brian Williams, the Paternoster Gang, and even Craig, Sophie and their son Alfie, for some reason. Thankfully these plans were changed, because it would have been unbearably excessive and unnecessary. Instead we get a short but sweet cameo from Karen Gillan as a vision of Amy Pond, sending her Raggedy Doctor off into the night. Amy was pretty much the definitive character of the 11th Doctor's era, being the first face he saw and all that stuff. We saw time and time again just how important she was to 11 on a personal level, so it's really nice to see her appear here, even if it is a bit weird that they're both wearing wigs, since they were bald for other roles at the same time.
Put it back on.
Why?
Your ears are like rocket fins.
I know.
The resulting regeneration is really emotional and I love the Doctor's farewell speech. It feels very authentic and touching. Usually I hate Moffat's overly poetic style of writing, but there's something about this specific monologue that really hits me. It's not just about the regeneration of a fictional alien character, it's a piece of philosophy that can be applied to our everyday human lives. We're always growing and changing as people. I myself am nothing like I was even 4 years ago. It's like I was a complete different person, which is kind of the point of this speech.
We're all different people, all through our lives.
And then, almost in the blink of an eye, the 11th Doctor is gone, with Peter Capaldi immediately hitting the ground running and making an impact with an endearing and funny first impression. He makes his mark very quickly and effectively, and I swear that's not me just being biased because 12 is my favourite Doctor.
Kidneys! I've got new kidneys! I don't like the colour.
Time of the Doctor is a very good regeneration story. I'd even go so far as to suggest it might even be underrated, because a lot of people tend to heavily criticise it for some reason. There's a lot of very strong emotional writing in the episode, because it feels like this epic last stand for the Doctor, this inescapable doom. The narrative is a simple yet complex thriller filmed and presented in a beautiful way. It's a gorgeous and cinematic episode. There's a scale to it that almost no other Doctor Who stories have been able to capture. Everything about it feels huge and significant. It's the perfect decision to take this incarnation who can never settle down and force him to stay and protect a town for thousands of years. There's a fitting irony to it, and I love how he becomes this celebrated figure within the community, which is constantly changing around him as he himself grows old. It's a fascinating way for the character to regenerate, and Matt Smith once again delivers a powerhouse performance, capturing every emotion perfectly. I love the Time Lord presence, tying it to Day of the Doctor, and it's amazing to see the events that have led to Name of the Doctor, this time the disaster being averted. The music is phenomenal, adding a lot of power to the emotional scenes, and I love how Clara is able to save the Doctor just when he gives up. It puts a neat bow on the pair's relationship. Overall, I'd award Time of the Doctor an A ranking on the Series 7B tier list and the Specials tier list. It's a brilliant farewell to the 11th Doctor with a wonderful regeneration scene, but there are some minor issues holding it back, like the awkward exposition to conclude an arc spanning 3 entire series. That element just feels like a bad way to pay it off, even if the general idea is good in principle. But as a whole, the special is a very entertaining and well-paced rollercoaster of emotions, answering a lot of questions along with giving the show a fresh lease of life with a whole new regeneration cycle for the Doctor. It's an epic send-off for a very good incarnation of the character, and the optimistic regeneration perfectly clears the way for the modern show's second golden age. And speaking of, here we go. And I'd like to give an extra special thank you to my Asbantium level patron, Fowlon Cortez, my Platinum level patron, Maximilian Foreman, and all my Gold level patrons, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, Golg Nogler, Herna Versog, and Luke_SY. Thank you so much for your support.